There's a phenomenon that occurs in deep realization. So this video is really talking about that stage, this falling away that I'm going to talk about, that is not first awakening. It's something that does happen to people much later, typically, or just in a significantly deeper stage of things. So take that as you will. This could be triggering to some people, maybe not for most, but I think for some it could be. But I think it's important to talk about it because it's one of those things that until it happens, it's really challenging to even imagine what it would be. Until this occurs, it's like, I can see how it'll come across. The message is going to come across. It's going to sound somewhat like theoretical or philosophical, but it's not at all. It's a very visceral change. It's a very fundamental, a change that's very fundamental to your experience of yourself and your experience of reality, your experience of the physical world. And so, yeah, it's a very deep, fundamental, and visceral change or dropping away that I'm referring to here. But I think it's important to talk about it because it does happen. And when it happens, it can be challenging in some way, for sure. So what I'm talking about is that at some point in deep realization, typically, I'll say typically it's actually after the self-construct is like completely dissolved. The sense of a self being here is just not found anymore. A self of any kind, meaning like a personal self, but also any kind of like universal self. It doesn't mean that there's no selfing that can occur. Like the mechanism of trying to reify a self, for instance, can occur. It's just very, very obvious that that's not happening to you. It's not happening to anyone. There's no one that's happening to is probably the easiest way of saying it accurately. So, there, it doesn't mean like, everything is over, or you're in complete perfect bliss all the time, or that the remnants of the self don't have any effect. None of those are true. But it is absolutely obvious, energetically clear, and not something you can overlook anymore at all, that there is no actual separate self. It's just not there. And when you see this, you actually see a lot. You see a lot comes with this. You see how much was invested in that self, that illusion. You see how much of that investment also feels so real, even if you didn't realize it was related to your idea of a self or your sense of a self. And so a lot actually falls away with this. It's not just what we consider conventionally the self, but it's like kind of like everything in a sense. So when that occurs, and usually I would say pretty much after that occurs, I mean, it can occur to some degree before, but it's much more clear, obvious, and people will usually say it very accurately to me when this is happening. And that is that there's nowhere to land anymore. There's no ability to hold a position to form a frame of reference anymore. You can see that it's just not there. You can feel it and you know it. And it's not like you expect to have it back because you can see it was never really there. And yet the habit of trying to find a position, trying to find a resting place, trying to find a foundation, the habit is still there, or it can be periodically. And so depending on how strong that habit is when this falling away occurs, this can be pretty unsettling. When we're talking about deep stage realization, there's so much variation among people who go through this stuff that it's hard for me to give you a hard and fast rule about this, because for some people it does not feel distressing at all. But for some people it's kind of distressing for some time. Usually a short time. And usually when I talk to somebody who's going through this, I can help them settle it pretty quickly. Settle it meaning really seeing through the beliefs that are still remaining. These are usually nonverbal beliefs. These are pre-conceptual, but they are strong. They're more like tendencies. And so usually it's an easy thing to rectify if we're feeling discordant because of this, or we're feeling uncomfortable because of this. But what we see clearly is the truth of the situation. And the truth of the situation is there is no longer an ability to find a basis for experience, So again, that can all sound very philosophical until you feel it. When you feel it, it's like, whoa, it's like the ground came out from under you and it's not coming back. It's kind of like that, right? Now, I don't know how this lands, depending on who's listening to this. It could be like, well, that's scary. I don't want that to happen. Or it could be like, yep, that's what happened to me. I remember. Or maybe you're going through it. But regardless of any of the momentary impressions you might have, just know that when this occurs, you're ready for it. Like you're okay with this generally, even if you feel dysphoric about it, it's like, this is how it goes. And you can feel that, and you have a deep trust in this process by then. And you also know that you will adjust, although you can't really comfort yourself with those kinds of ideas anymore of like, oh, in the future I'll feel better, right? It's not like that. It's just feels like you're trying to find something you can't find, right? What you're really looking for is a self. You're looking for the self that's not there. But it's not a conceptual self. It's not a memory-based self. It's like a foundational sense. That's what you're looking for, and it's not there. So then what do you do, right? What's the upshot of this, and why am I making the video? Well, I guess I just wanted to summarize a little bit, because I've actually talked to a couple of different people recently who have gone and or are going through this. And I've also watched the comment section. I see one or maybe two people, I think, who may be going through this as well recently. So the things I want to say about this, first of all, as I mentioned, this is just par for the course. It's totally okay. It is how this goes. And like all the other weird things that happen throughout this process, you will adjust to it and you'll acclimatize. Now you won't, of course, and that's the comedy of all this, but it will happen. There will be a stabilization of this in a really beautiful way, actually, in a really, really beautiful way. So this isn't distressing to me to hear this, because I know where this leads. I know what the result is. I know what the outcome of this is, and it's wonderful. Really, it is. It's a very nice way of existing, even though it's not a personal way of existing. But it's satisfying. I could say it's natural. It's another degree of clarity for sure. So that's the first thing I want to say is like, it's okay. You're going to be okay, and this is natural. It's lawful. It's how this goes. The second thing is something I already mentioned as well, and that's just, it can help a little bit to understand the mechanism. And the mechanism is simple. You're looking for a self that's not there. You know it's not there. It's clearly not there. You can tell every moment that it's not there, and it never was. And you know that, right? I don't have to convince you of it at this point. It's just clear. And at the very same time, you can feel something reaching. It's like reaching for something. It's like trying to find something, trying to find a place to land or stabilize, or, and none of that's here anymore. You can't do that. Well, the mechanism is what you used to do that with. I'm using colloquially, I suppose, but what used to be the target of that energy or that intention, it's not intention, that tendency was the self-structure. And the self-structure doesn't exist, right? So you were never actually being stabilized. What was happening was there was stabilization into the illusory mental self, right? Stabilization into mind-identified standing wave of as I talk about, of mind identification and thought identification and the illusion of past and future and all of it. That's what was being used to stabilize, but it's not a true stability. It's a really uncomfortable stability that requires a lot of effort, a lot of input of energy, a lot of struggle and strain, and it has so many side effects, and unconsciousness being probably the most concerning one, depending on conditions, right? So that's what you used to look for stability, but that's just not there. So the upshot of this is the mechanism of trying to find it, of trying to find a stability can still be there, right? It's still doing something or looking to try to do something. It's like looking for an anchor point, right? You'll feel something like scrambling, looking for an anchor point. The word I could use would be disorienting. It's disorienting because you don't know how to orient or where to orient. Now, usually when this is happening, I should mention, in the vast majority of cases, people are actually functioning fine. And they usually will say, I'm functioning fine. I'm working full time. I'm taking care of my kids. Like, I'm doing all the things I need to be doing. But it's your internal experience. It's not really so much internal, but it's your quote unquote seeming personal experience that is feeling this distress. But you still have the cognitive faculties to just look objectively at your life and go, yeah, I'm actually functioning fine. And most of the time that's the case. So it's also helpful just to remind yourself you're doing fine. You're functioning. You're doing the things you need to do. And you don't, and by noticing that, you realize you don't need to stabilize yourself in that way to function. The functioning is automatic. The functioning is natural. It's spontaneous, right? This is total exertion. Nothing is needed. No effort is needed. No will is needed for all of this to come forward, to just appear as it does. Body, mind, universe, one continuum. It's just doing this. There's no one doing it. It doesn't need anyone to do it. It doesn't need a foundation. It doesn't need a basis. It's just happening, right? So that's the kind of mechanistic realization that will come. It will dawn with some time. The other part of this is that even though all of those mechanistic understandings are helpful, and that, the reassurance that it's natural and that you will get through it and all that, your instinct probably tells you that ultimately it's fine. Even though all that's true, on the other side of things, the physicality of it is strong, right? There can be this strong tendency to you could call it maybe energetic restlessness. Some people might call it ninth fetter. You could call it the will. To me, it feels like a life force, or the will to be, that was co-opted by this mind-identified process for so long that it doesn't know what to do with itself. So it's like this intense energy that's like trying to find a place for itself. It's trying to do something. It's trying to be somewhere. It's trying to orient somewhere. And to orient, you need a foundation. Because if I can orient on a foundation, then I know what I'm orienting toward or away from. And now you don't have the foundation. So toward and away from don't make any sense anymore, right? So there's this raw energy to this that is, you can't negotiate with it. You can't talk yourself out of it. It's not about just dissolving thoughts or calming the mind or body. That can help. Calming the mind and body can always help, but ultimately it's got to play itself out a little bit. It just does. It moves through, it kind of burns itself out. You may try somatic modalities, TRE or yoga or exercise or, intuitive dance or all the things, let the body move, maybe process in a physical way. But ultimately it's this energetic, life force that doesn't know what to do with itself. So what it'll do is it will calm down over time. Now, it may be really intense for a while and then just calm down dramatically. I've seen that pattern. I've seen people describe that. I've also seen it just kind of slowly calm down or kind of wax and wane for a while. All of those things can happen, and there's not a damn thing you can do about it. You just got to let it move through. Kind of like Kundalini, right? It's like, it's just there. It's going to move through. Fighting it is probably the worst thing you can do. It's nothing conceptual. There's nothing about beliefs that are going to make it better or worse. It's just moving through, right? So there's that component to this as well, and I think it's important to acknowledge that. And then the kind of last thing I want to say about this is the good news is the good news to this. There's really good news here. The good news is that although it's very deeply rooted and it's not a conceptual belief, it can be stated as a conceptual belief. And this is the good news. The good news is that the belief that you actually have to direct all that energy, the belief that you have to have a foundation, the belief that you have to have a backdrop or an orientation or an anchor point, again, it's more than a belief. It's very visceral, but essentially there's something that could be interpreted as a belief there. It's erroneous. You don't need any of that, and you never did. And that will become clearer and clearer for you. So there's a way you can positively orient in a sense, but not to an anchor point. You can't orient to something that's fixed because there's nothing that's fixed, right? You can't orient to a foundation because there isn't one. What you can orient to is, in a sense, you can orient to the transient nature of all of this. You can orient to the non-orientation. You can orient to the non-abiding nature of experience. You can orient to the miraculous appearance and disappearance of all of this out of God knows what, like just nothing, right? It's like appearing, disappearing, appearing, disappearing. And the intimacy of it, it's always so intimate. The intimacy is not a problem. It's not hard to find. It's not elusive unless you cling to it. Because the moment you cling to it, you're going to be turning it into a mental process, right? So this kind of surrender is total surrender to this intimacy. But the intimacy is wonderful, and it will become more and more prominent in your experience. It's the intimacy of full immersion. It's the intimacy of total exertion of the entire universe coming forward as this sound, as the movement of the hands, the feet, the sensations in the chest, the breathing, the sky, the birds moving through the sky. This is total exertion. All just this, one expression, one doing. So beautiful when there's no clinging, when there's no trying to make it a certain way, right? But I need it to be this way for me. Do you? Yeah, that'll be really uncomfortable at this point. It is the way it is. And it's not any specific way either. You could say it's endless flux, but you can orient to the surrender to the flux. You're orienting now to surrender. You're orienting now to the flux of vivid experience that's non-dualistic. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. You let it take you over and over again and again and again and again. It's the falling away that never stops falling away, falling, gone beyond. It's wonderful. And you will, I suppose, learn to orient to that. It's just a different kind of orienting. It's not a physical orientation. It's not a spatial orientation. It's not a existential orientation. There's no foundation. There's no basis. There's no actual way that anything is. You don't need any of that though, right? Just this. Listen. Just the heard, just the seen, just the felt, right? There's a Zen, I think it's from the Mumonkan, a very short Zen poem. I wrote it. I have it somewhere, actually. Read it recently. And I think it's beautiful. Yeah, I think this really exemplifies what I'm talking about. It says, 10,000 flowers in spring, the moon in autumn, the cool breeze in summer, snow in winter. If your mind isn't clouded by unnecessary things, meaning trying to find a foundation, a position, trying to orient, trying to hold on, grasp, push away. Like if your mind is not entangled with all that, if your mind isn't clouded by unnecessary things, this is the best season of your life. That's exactly how it is.